Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Sidney Sachs, and today I'd like to welcome Mike Karsen. Welcome, Mike. I'm glad to have you on the show today. Mike is going to talk to us about genealogy sources in Chicago. I guess maybe we should start with the history of Chicago, especially the Jews in Chicago. When did the first Jews come to Chicago?
Well, the first Jews came in the 1830s, but they really didn't settle there till the 1840s, 1841. And the earliest Jews were, peddlers, and they owned dry goods stores and kind of were merchants. And most of them came from Germany. And brought Reform Judaism with them. One of the monuments, if you go to downtown Chicago in the Federal Building, actually there's a plaque there that talks about the first synagogue, which was KAM, and it was founded in 1847 as a permanent settlement there. And the KAM means the men of the West. So in 1847, 1840s, Chicago was really on the western frontier. It wasn't, we think of it as the middle of the country, but it was still a frontier place.
Didn't they even conduct services in German for a while? For many years?
I think there was some in German, but also in English. And as far as later, so the Germans came earlier, and they adapted pretty well. They assimilated pretty well. They dressed cleanly. They looked, they came into the society. They learned English fairly well, and they were very successful in business on early days. There's companies known as Hart, Schaffner, and Marx, and those companies were the early Jews and established a lot of commercial establishments there. And then in the 1880s, the next wave came, and that started with, of course, the Eastern European Jews who came, and they recreated on the near west side, they call it, which was the Maxwell Street area, just south of what today is the downtown area, the Loop of Chicago. And that was really, they kind of recreated the Eastern European shtetl there with all the nuances. They had ended up having over 100 of these small synagogues, like storefront synagogues where people would go. And they had Maxwell Street, of course, if you study Chicago history, is known as a great marketplace and trading place where people would come, and that lived on into the 60s and 70s, but that now has been renovated with the University of Illinois campus, which kind of
we took it over.
Took over the whole area, and there was a big fight to maintain it, but the city compromised back in the 90s and created another marketplace, but it's not
the Maxwell Street
anymore. It's not really
anymore.
the same, and of course the ethnicity has changed, and there's no Polish hot dogs, Polish sausages that used to be sold on the street there, and all the other things that went on there. Now, as far as the history of the Jews, if you count, again, the Jews, they were very small, populated in the 1850s, 1860s, the German Jews, and then in the 1880s they started coming in kind of masses, and by 1900 there were about 75,000 Jews in Chicago, and that grew to about 200,000 over 200,000 by 1920, and eventually topped out in 1940 at 290,000, which, if you look at today, basically would maintain the same level if you count today, which is always difficult. How do you count a Jew? But the best sources, the people in power, say that it's about 270,000.
Is that in the city or including the suburbs?
Well, that's the whole metropolitan area, because the Jews actually, we can come to that later, have migrated with time.
Most of them, I guess, now live on the northwest side.
They live on, most of the Jews live in the far north of the city, and then in the northern suburbs. Now, if I can give a little more of a genealogist view of history, because as a genealogist, I, count basically when records start being available. So I could give you the history of the Indians of Illinois, but I'd really like to say Illinois became a state in 1818.
Yes,
so the really first federal census, even though there were some records before then, are 1820. So if you're looking at Illinois as a genealogist, you would start basically with the 1820 census, and in Chicago, where the population was, the first city directory was 1839. So we have a pretty good collection of city directories. Of course, they became more frequent as we went on in time.
How often did they publish these city directories?
Well, the city directory was highly irregular because it was done, of course, by commercial companies. So there were a few in the early 1839, I said, was the first one. I think there's some in the 1850s. But then once you get past 1900, then they're like every other year, kind of. But of course, again, there was no regular pattern. It wasn't done by the government, so they had no mandate to do it on certain sequence. It was just when they could publish it, and of course, these were commercial ventures. The other records, as far as I'm concerned, the newspapers now have become a very valuable record for genealogists in general, and Chicago Tribune has now been totally digitized, which is a tremendous...
Oh, going all the way back to
going back to 1849.
Oh, wow.
So that's been scanned in, and even though there are sometimes a few holes in there, it's not, they never tell you exactly how full it is, but it's a tremendous...
How do you get to that website, or do you have to go through ProQuest or something like that?
Right. There's two versions of what we call the Chicago Tribune Online or Chicago Tribune Historical Index. And one is through ProQuest, as you said, which has scanned in many of the major newspapers, New York Times, Washington.
And that's available in the libraries in the
That would
county.
be available, nationwide in any library that has the right ProQuest, and that's a full text scan. So I could type in my father's name. I did that actually, and I was surprised to find them actually in the Tribune. And I found both my parents' engagement announcement and their marriage announcement, which I never thought that they would be in the Tribune, because the Tribune at that time was
Republican.
it was not probably something that Jewish people put in, and it had to be. It was kind of expensive. It still is kind of an expensive brand, and my family was pretty poor.
Usually I don't know. We always got the Sun Times.
Yeah, right. So it wasn't, but it's a tremendous resource now. So that's the ProQuest. There's also one put out by Newsbank, which is another online publishing service, and that has kind of a little different view. It's very good for death notices, because if you type in a name, you can find death notices, which are very important to genealogists, and you can even put in text scan the text of it. So even if you not sure about the person's name, or if it's a very common name, you could put the person's name in the main search, and then you could put his wife's name in the supplemental text search, so you can get anything that had Paul Karsen and Ann Karsen in the same message, in the same death notice, and then you could filter down your people. So that's a very big boom recently.
And that's newsline.com?
Newsbank. And
Newsbank.
again, it depends. We have it's more prevalent probably in Chicago, but there may be some library, if you have a good library, might be able to access.
It's not something you can just access from home?
No, these things are not accessible.
Okay.
They're either through the library or some public service, but they're basically not for, they're not free for sure, and they're not sold to the individual for subscription purposes.
Okay, because I haven't heard of that one. I wonder if that one would be only accessible in Chicago area. But I'll try it. I'll ask the library here. So now you have your own website as well, where you have do you have links to these places then, or?
Yes. Well,
okay. First of all, your website is mikekarsen.com.
Well, that's I'll say my general, for my speaking and my genealogist. I have a unique website on the jewishgen.org website, the main Jewish website, and there I have an info file. So it's jewishgen.org/info file/Chicago.
Okay.
And kind of the history of it a little bit, if you're interested, is
sure.
I started with, there's a number of books written by people on resources in various cities. There's New York and Boston. And I started off on that leg to see, I could write a book about this, because I had a lot of information, and it was a void in Chicago. We didn't really have something, especially for Jewish genealogy. And I worked on it for about 8 or 9 months, and then I was about half done, and then I realized it was going to take me another year to get the other half done, and then I would realize when I started, the first half would all need to be really updated, because genealogy, especially with all these online things. So I decided to go to a website, and Jewish Gen was gracious enough to host it, and that way I can get most of my information there. And even I started with a partial, because partial was better than nothing. Yeah. And I've been updating it. Now I'm expanding it to the whole state of Illinois for cemeteries and other resources. So that's very good. And everything I'm going to really talk about, all the resources, are linked there in one way or another.
Yeah, when I looked at it, I'd always heard of just a couple of the cemeteries. I was amazed at how many different cemeteries that were listed there. You hear about the big one, was it Oak Hill?
There's Oakwoods.
The big one.
Yeah, well, so, there's Waldheim. There's a lot.
Waldheim's the one I was thinking of. Yes, the big one on the south side.
Maybe just continue a little bit.
Yeah.
My website has kind of two flavors to it. One is kind of by record group. So if you're looking for death records, I'll tell you, gee, if it's early, you should go to either the state of Illinois or to the county, or find it in what newspapers. And then I have kind of mid-range where you can find it, and then more current ones. So I kind of go that by record type. So if you're looking for death records, I'll kind of link then to the other side of my site, which is location by location, facilities, newspapers, archives. So one is or marriage records or naturalization records. I'll tell you where you can find those in Chicago, either online or in the physical place, walking there. And then the other one is place by place, like cemeteries, funeral homes, what government facilities, what does the state have. Basically, for genealogists, records are kept by the county. So most of the records are. Cook County is almost synonymous with Chicago. So if you're not familiar with it, if you just made that simplifying assumption, of course it goes into some of the suburban
Cook County
areas.
includes a little bit more,
It includes a little bit more, but
not too much more.
Not too much more. It's mostly synonymous pretty much with Chicago and the immediate suburbs around it. And they're the keeper of most of the records of the birth, marriages, and deaths, those type of records. So that's...
Let's say you can't go there to do research. So I know you can write to the county to get records. I don't know what they charge anymore. It's been a while since I did it, but you can't get them.
Oh yes, you can get them. We have, of course, there's laws on how long on the time frame. If I can get this right, death I think is 20 years, where it's beyond the immediate family, and marriages are 50 years. And births are 75 years. So those are the state's limits on when it's available to the general public, those records as far as their availability. And there's a lot of online resources. So if you're not, of course, a lot of people today are researching Chicago, but they can't get there, they're not there. And there's a lot of...
Now, has Cook County put some of the old records themselves online? I know that the Mormon Church has their microfilms of those places.
No, the county there's no real records from the county online. What the state has done, the state of Illinois the Secretary of State of Illinois has a very good website, and there they have, the best thing is the death index. They have a death index split into two parts. One is pre-1916 deaths, and those are alphabetical, and you can kind of search by name. And then there's after 1916 through about 1950. So those, for genealogists, it's a good thing to try and find your family that way.
And what's that website? It's the state one, so do you know offhand what the...
I think if you just Google, it's a long thing. It's Cyber Drive, Illinois.
Okay, just Google
Illinois
State Records.
Yeah, Illinois, State of Illinois Archives.
Okay.
Then you can find it, but they have a lot of, and they also have some early marriages. Unfortunately, they don't have any births on that thing, but they have marriages before 1900, and you can search those either by the bride's name or the groom's name. So now the other thing, Steve Morris, if you're familiar with Steve Morris, who's most famous for his Ellis Island, but he sometimes, somebody asked him to do Illinois, and what he's done is create a front end to the Illinois Death Index. So if you want to do a sound X search or something, you're not certain about how they spell the name, he has a front end on his website where he will reference and go to the Illinois thing and allow you to search the names a little more. If you weren't sure exactly how they spelled their name in 1887, he can help you with that.
His site is pretty marvelous, and what he's done to access all of the other facilities. Now, suppose if we can get to Chicago, what are the places that we would want to visit? Let's say if we go to the convention or something like that.
Yeah, well, if you come to the convention, there is downtown, in the center of the city, there's quite a bit, and the convention is going to be near downtown, Cook County Records. So there you could go in and get records of marriages, deaths, and births, and you can get those pretty fast. They'll do them, probably, I went there and they did a marriage right for me the same day. Unfortunately, what they've done now with the marriages, and it's kind of hurts genealogists, is the marriage records don't have a lot of information on them to begin with. They have the bride's name, the groom's name, maybe the age, the place, and the person who performed the marriage. So they've transcribed that information into a master database. So if you go in there, I went there to do my late wife's parents' marriage, and they found it, and they said, oh, good, and they printed it out, but they printed out a new form, like on a brand new piece of paper, and just plugged in, like mail merged in the names. And I said, oh, that's not what I want. I want to see the original document from when they were first married. But this is what sometimes technology leads us to. So that's both good and bad.
And then the problem is if they transcribed everything right, or they read it, which is of course the problem at Ellis Island. Now I just mentioned the convention. Now the convention in Chicago, the Jewish Genealogy Convention, is next year?
It's in August of 2008.
Oh, wait, so
I could tell you exact date somewhere in my
well,
pilot.
It's in August of
it's middle of August of 2008, and it's going to be at the Marriott, which is right on Michigan Avenue. So it's very
nice place.
It's a nice location, and actually it's pretty close to most of the places that I was going to mention to you. Within not quite walking distance. Well, if you're ambitious, it's walking distance. If you're a walker, it's walking distance. Otherwise, it's probably a mile or two. So it depends on
20-minute walk.
It's a 20-minute walk. So depending on your athletic ability. So the Cook County Records is a good place. The other thing they have there, if you're really a good genealogist, and your family owned property, they have all the property records and showing you how transfers were made, the history of the properties. So again, some of this you probably want to prepare ahead of time to try and figure out where they were, and the addresses, of course, as a good genealogist. Do your homework before you go to any facility and try and remember that. But if you're trying to figure out, did they own the building, did they rent there, who lived there, you might be able to do that. That takes a little more work, and it's not quite as obvious. So that's the first place. And then, I have a few more places.
I was going to say also that any of the websites that you've mentioned, we'll put them on our web page so that there'll be a link to them. There'll be a link to your website if people, and our website is tracingroots.nova.org, and that we say every show, so hopefully people will know that and can link from our place to yours, even if they couldn't write down all of the other...
that's good, yes, right.
Okay, now what are some of the other places
now
that we can...
The other place which is right across from the Cook County building, is the Daley Center. It's a high-rise building. It's basically the Cook County courts. And there they have, on the 11th floor, they have the archives of all the court records, especially the early court records from Chicago. So that's very good, especially if you're doing naturalization, if your family were immigrants and they came to Chicago.
Oh, that's where the records
between 1871 and 1950. There is an index that was made of all naturalization records back in the 30s by the
Conservation Corps?
Yeah, right. By the and
so
that's all soundexed, so you can find anyone. And the good thing about it is if you have an immigrant, by the time they were naturalized, their name was probably more stable. So if you say, I don't know what their name was when they came to America, by the time they got their papers, they had decided on what their name was going to be. So that's a very good resource to go look at that Soundex index, and I'll come back to later. Actually, you can get that information ahead of time if you like, but they actually have the naturalization, about half of the naturalization papers there, especially the early ones that before the federal courts took over more. So if they came between 1890 and 1920 and they were naturalized, you could probably pick up for $11, get actually the naturalization file right there. Now, the other thing they have there, which is also of good interest to genealogists, is they have probate records and wills. So if you're really digging into your ancestors' past and you want to know more about them, if they have a probate or a will, that's again a great source of what was going on in the family, who all the kids were, what was going on, what kind of money did they have, were they successful?
I was surprised that some of the people that did have wills that we found in my husband's family that we didn't think they were wealthy enough to bother with something like that, but it listed even like bed sheets and pillows.
So that is kind of interesting, again, as kind of getting, you
Yeah.
know, as a true genealogist, you want to know those little
That's
extra
right.
things about them, of what did they have, did he own a car, what kind of car did he have, what's involved. So that's the first thing. Again, it takes a little time to do that. You have to go through a few processes, but they're very helpful there. The other thing they have there, if you know, depending on your family history, is divorce records. So I was able to get somebody's fellow I was helping, his grandfather's divorce records, and if you go back in history, the divorce records were a little more juicy because in those days they had to find cause, you know, so everyone was, you know, so they had a lot more affidavits, a lot of information of trying to figure out why they needed to divorce the person. So those can be very interesting. You may not want to find out about some of this stuff, but if you're a good genealogist. And then they have criminal records and anything that went through the court system that you might be able to find there. So it's kind of, if you're digging down to the next level. So that's the second place. The third place, again, if you're into really doing kind of a historical context, is a place called the Chicago History Museum, which used to be called the Chicago Historical Society.
Okay.
They've kind of renovated, rebranded it now, and they have a lot of records. They have city directories, they have phone books, but they're the best, and they have a lot of books on the history of Chicago. So if your family was involved in some institutions or whatever they were involved in, you can really dig into it. And they also have a tremendous photo file. So if your family lived on Halsted Street, which is in the middle of the Maxwell Street area, or some other major street or something, they have huge files by street, by topic on photos. And you have to, if you want to use them, then you have to pay them for the rights and pay them to copy it. But that's also a very good historical way of kind of putting flesh on the bone and really doing a family history rather than just genealogy.
Now, I'm going to go back a little bit. You mentioned the Chicago Tribune, that their stuff was indexed. What about any of the other newspapers?
No, unfortunately, the other newspapers have not been scanned. I would actually get to my next place I was going to talk about was the Herald Washington, which is the headquarters of the Chicago Public Library. And that has the most newspapers in the city. So they have the other newspapers, where especially if you're doing Jewish genealogy or your family wasn't quite in favor of the Tribune or couldn't afford it because it, again, was the top of the line, they have the Daily News, Chicago Sun, Chicago Times, Sun Times, all the vintages on microfilm. So if you're going to do that, and especially if you're looking for like death notices, you better have a date or a lot of patience.
Oh, okay,
Because
there's nothing
basically,
indexed.
It's not indexed, so you're looking day by day, page by page through the newspapers. So again, you have to have a lot of patience. So
What about the Jewish newspapers?
there are a lot of Jewish newspapers, and those are at a place called Spertus Institute, which is
Okay.
also on Michigan Avenue, kind of facing the lake, just a little further south. So you need to walk another mile. So if you're, if you walk 2.5 miles, you can get there.
Okay, we've only got about 3 minutes left, so I want to hit quickly the cemeteries. Do you want to say something about the cemeteries, or you just really have to know where the people are buried because there's so many of them?
Well, no, I would like to say something. Chicago has a great ethnic heritage, so if you're looking at general genealogy, there's certain places where the Catholics had, and the Polish and the Irish. I specialize in Jewish genealogy, and we're kind of lucky because there's basically 4 cemeteries that have, based on my calculation, 60% of the Jewish burials. So you can go to, and basically, it's three. One is Waldheim, which has over 150,000 burials. They have a kind of a joke that there's more dead people in Forest Park than live people today, and they have over 150,000 historic ones going back to the 1870s and 1880s, and they're very cooperative. They have a website too. So, and if you send to them, they'll even maybe go get a photo for you. Mention my name. Tell them that I send people there because we're trying to help each other. Genealogical society and cemeteries have a lot.
They were very nice. The
common.
section that we went to find my husband's family was very nice. They said, why don't you come back in a few days? And I said, no, we were here one afternoon on our way someplace else. And they said, go out to have lunch. And we came back and they told us exactly where the burial places were, and we were able to find them without any trouble. So I was really pleased with how nice they were. 'Cause I did find that at Rose Hill, for instance.
Right.
And that's I guess not exclusively Jewish. They just have some Jewish burials.
At
At
Rose Hill? Oh, yeah, Rose Hill is mostly not Jewish, but they do have, I think, 2 Jewish sections.
Yeah. And so what else did you,
Well,
I interrupted you sort of
Well,
on the,
And the cemetery. So cemeteries, and actually, I'm closely associated with the Jewish Genealogical Society of Illinois. I have to give them a plug because I'm now the co-president of that society. So we're indexing a number of cemeteries. So even a cemetery called West Lawn, we're in the process. So we have some of the records now, and we're going to put that up on Joe Bar and our own website. So we have 3 cemetery projects. We have Graceland Cemetery. We have all indexed now, which is one of the oldest cemeteries. It's not very big, but if you had German Jews from the mid-1850s and on, we might have them at Jewish Graceland, and you can contact the society, either contact me or contact the society, and we could tell you whether they're there or not. So this is one of our pushes in our society to get these records indexed, and some of the cemeteries are cooperating, so it's very good.
and there's one question that we talked about before. I'm just going to state it because we're just about out of time. You said the synagogues did not have the records that you might expect that some synagogues would have.
Right, yeah, there's no organized synagogue records. There's the Chicago Jewish Archives, and they have files of records from synagogues, so you could go to them and go through it, but you're not going to find birth, marriage, or death things. You're going to find records of the board and maybe the newsletters and what was going on. So if someone was prominent in the synagogue, you might find them there.
Okay, so thank you very much. We're really out of time. Thank you, Mike. You've given me a lot to think about for Chicago. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just sit and talk for